Okay, I'm here with Kenna. Kenna, hello.
Hi.
We are doing a Theramonial interview. Thank you so much, Kenna, for being here. And we're just going to kind of start right in with the first question. So tell me, what made you curious about therapy in the first place?
So I had a friend who has done therapy for a while now, but had stopped seeing the current therapist she was with when she moved, and she was getting started at the student counseling center at the campus that we're at. And so she was talking to me about, what a good experience it was, and obviously the fact that we can go for free because we are students. And I was, hitting a point in my grad school degree that I was especially stressed, and so it was a really, really good timing for me to want to check it out when I hadn't really done any kind of counseling before.
I see. Cool. So no experience before, but just that like stress, overwhelm, life circumstances.
Different pieces. So like the administrative side of needing to go in and get everything set up was, there were times that was kind of demoralizing. Like I realized, okay, there's only like a 2-hour window during the day that you can go in if you haven't been seen before. And it turns out they can only help you in a semester that you are actively enrolled. So I happened to be having a difficult time in one of the like summer sessions where I wasn't taking classes. So the first time I went in, they had to very kindly turn me away and said they couldn't really do anything. But when I came back a few weeks later, they were able to help me then. I will say the only other part of the administrative that has been difficult is since then, the counselor I was seeing has gone private practice. And so she was able to kind of walk me through the reasons why most counselors won't work with the particular insurance that I'm on. So it was frustrating to realize, I'm really fortunate as a student that I do have affordable mental health care, but if that's ever not the case, it's going to be harder to, access counseling or therapy in the future if I want it. But once I actually got to, meet with someone for the intake session at the Student Counseling Center, it was, even in that session that was only like a quick 30 minutes, you're talking to someone who probably won't be your counselor eventually, but you're just kind of walking through everything that's going on. That was really affirming for me to just get to have someone ask questions and look at like, okay, these are the 12 things going on right now that are stressing you out. It's totally fine that you were having a lot of anxiety. So I guess it was really good to feel like validated and to hear someone say, of course you are having a hard time right now with all of this going on. Like we can work together to help you manage that, but what you're experiencing is really real. And it's good that you were taking steps to address it.
Okay, cool. Wow. Okay, so a lot of like logistical trickiness, navigating the timing, the availability, and then the difference between student services versus private practice.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, you talked about money. I mean, that's like comes up in every conversation I'm having around therapy lately, because it seems like sometimes the great therapists or the best options have huge price tags, and or the stuff that is free or available at low cost is limited or has like a time limit. Okay, interesting. And then getting into talk a little bit, I'll just want to kind of clarify this part that you went into the student clinic and met with an intake therapist who ended up not being who you worked with long term. Is that right?
Right. So you go in and it's kind of just whoever doesn't have a session in that window initially meets with you. And once you've talked through everything, they kind of go through, since they have a large staff that they're able to maintain, and think about, whose specialties kind of line up with what you want to work on. So that when they do pair you up with somebody, they already, probably have a background, if you're working on relationship stuff, or if you have, particular kinds of anxiety around social interaction or around whatever it might be, they've got even more resources than, most counselors might have on that particular issue.
Okay, cool. So they interview you, make sure you're a good fit for therapy in general, and then get you with the right therapist for the specific needs.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so just kind of for anyone who's watching, that's a really common dynamic or a common way that clinics are set up. It sounds like, Kenna, it was positive for you in a lot of ways, like just kind of unloading in that first 30 minutes and someone saying, yeah, of course this is hard. We're going to get you some help. There's some hope here. And for some people though, it can feel like just another speed bump to like actually getting to like the quote unquote real help, you know? Either way makes sense. You know, there's no right or wrong way to experience it. So once you did get into your kind of longer term therapist, how did you know that that person was the right fit for you?
So really early on with Jane, who was the one who became my therapist, I think she sensed that I was kind of nervous coming into, you know, the therapeutic space for the first time, and, you know, needing to really share things that had felt, you know, very private, and that I think coming from a community that doesn't necessarily put a lot of emphasis on like intentional mental health care, you know, was just kind of uncomfortable at first. And I think she really set those nerves at ease for me by being really methodical and explaining, you know, her practice and her philosophy, as well as explaining kind of, you know, how much control I had in the situation of, you know, we can focus on the things you want to focus on. We only will go, you know, as far as you want to go. You know, like, even though you've chosen to come into this space, like, you only have to be kind of as, you know, revealed as you want to be, which was, you know, a very reaffirming thing initially before I was quite comfortable enough to start really, you know, explaining everything.
Yeah, that collaborative approach seems to make a big difference for most people, because there's this dynamic, this kind of combination of the therapist expertise. You know, they have all this training, they have the license, they have kind of the official approval of all these systems that they can go and help people in these different areas. And yet there's you, like a client who has their own expertise on themselves. You know, no matter how much training I have, I don't know anything about you, right? And no matter how much training, is it Jane, your therapist, had before, she didn't know anything about you before you came in and started to open up. So to collaborate and kind of meet in the middle and say, I can bring my expertise, you bring yours, and I can kind of guide you at the pace that you're comfortable with and in the direction you're comfortable with. That sounds like it really worked for you.
Definitely. It was a really good experience.
That's cool. Okay. So was she pretty explicit with that? Like, she said, we'll only go as far as you want to go, for example?
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think a lot of times to start the session, she would kind of reiterate, you know, guidelines of, you know, how to make sure that I was comfortable with whatever was going on, in addition to kind of an open-ended question of, you know, what is it that you want to work on today? So that I got to set the agenda, and she was great at kind of, you know, adapting to that and getting on board with whatever it was that I, you know, wanted to spend some time on.
Cool. That's really great. Okay. So a little bit overlap with the next question. So what was the most helpful in your experience with her?
I think what was the most helpful? I think in a lot of ways, you know, her ability to know the kinds of questions to ask was really helpful. You know, like you're saying, you know, I knew my experiences. And so, you know, when I was just explaining how I was feeling, you know, that wasn't really new information all the time, but she would know how to kind of point out like the underlying assumptions of what I was talking about to be able to say, you know, okay, you know, in the way that you're talking about this, you know, how far down the list of priorities are you putting yourself? Or, you know, I can see how much anxiety it feels like is, you know, embedded in that response. Like, can we talk about why, you know, just her ability to respond to what I had to say helped me definitely like get to a place of thinking about it I wouldn't have gotten to on my own. And she was also like, she talked to me about my goals, and they seemed to line up really well with hers, of like developing, you know, kind of my own like tool set of ways that, you know, after the conclusion of therapy, I would be able to practice on my own. So like she would assign, you know, like homework assignments, that for me, like started building in a habit of, you know, like it's okay to actually put time on your schedule that you're going to dedicate to working on your mental health, in a way that, you know, as a, you know, a grad student who's always obsessed with, you know, getting the A and getting the good marks on it. If I hadn't had someone else giving me an assignment to start with, probably would have been hard to start.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. So questions, like kind of gently probing questions, helping you understand more of what you're feeling and thinking. And then the homework assignments, and even just using your strength, like that kind of maybe type A seeking, student, using that strength and applying it to this part of your life. Let's kind of use what you already do, all these tools you already have to help you with your mental health. I love that idea of giving mental health the space on your calendar that it needs, right? Instead of just kind of trying to squeeze it in or hoping it happens, to actually calendar it as if it were like a class you're going to teach or a meeting you have, or even like, the yoga class you want to go to, you're actually just putting it on there. It helps take more seriously, I think. That's cool. So what, if anything, didn't work?
So I think there were a few just like individual exercises that Jane recommended that it didn't really seem to help a lot for me. Like there was one where like she has people pick like one space in their house that they are going to go in and like intentionally try to manifest as much like worry as they can for a very short period of time. And I think for a few reasons, one, I lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment, so there wasn't like a space I didn't go in most of the time to do this. And second, I just, at least at the point we were trying that, wasn't really able to like shut down that worry after, the 5 minutes were up. So they would just be small suggestions that she would give me and I would try out, and it would be like, okay, this at least right now isn't what I need. And the other thing that I think didn't really work is, in trying to give me tools so that I could, be working on my own mental health when I wasn't in therapy, she also recommended a few self-help books. And I think the English side of me maybe came out too strongly, where I was assessing like the low quality of the writing, and some of the classist assumptions that were embedded into the materials I was reading. And so it stopped being about the advice they were giving and became like another piece of literature to assess.
I love that. And I identify with that a lot. So I get it. Anything else that didn't work or that comes up when you think about that?
The other main thing I think is it mainly came down to kind of just a disagreement of kind of how you like perceive your own identity between Jane and I. And she was open, I think, in some ways to those differences, but I felt like some of the solutions we were discussing hit a point that they weren't really addressing. Jane would feel like if I were bringing in like an issue in my relationship and trying to figure out, what I was feeling, how I wanted to approach it, that sort of thing, that could be, kind of put in a separate box from, say, like your professional identity or your political activist identity. And so I feel uncomfortable trying to consider something going on like with my partner and I outside of the scope of, what are the gender conventions at play? What is the the political significance of what we're going through? And I think sometimes Jane really wanted me to just see it as two people figuring something out and be able to kind of let go of the context around it. So we never really got on the same page about that.
Do you know her licensure? Like, is she a social worker or a psychologist or?
I think she's a psychologist. She did her training through the Student Counseling Center to do therapy, and she's now, I'm not sure if there's a difference in the words like counseling and therapy, but I think she calls her what she does therapy at this point rather than counseling.
I'm curious because it sounds like kind of one of the main differences between like a systems-based training, which is marriage and family therapy. That's what I am licensed as. And then kind of more individual focus with psychology or certified professional counselor. So she may, or even social work, it doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but it's an interesting point to observe because you speak so warmly of her and how she helped you. And even though you maybe have like very basic differences in the way you view your life or yourself or your role in the world and the systems around you and vice versa, it still really worked. Like it still was an effective relationship. but yeah, that difference between training can really manifest in the way that the different therapists work with their clients. So it's more just kind of a point of interest, and I think significant, and yet not so significant that you couldn't still get what you needed, out of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I still, much as we had that difference, feel so much gratitude towards her, because she really has, made incredible differences that I wouldn't have thought in the 6 months just that we worked together would have been possible. So in some ways it felt like kind of a point of growth of okay, I'm at a point where I can kind of think about our differences that are just personal differences rather than it always being, I need you to keep teaching me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. She's a human who maybe makes mistakes or doesn't get things in the same way that you do. And that's okay. It's not threatening to you that there's that difference, and it's not scary to you that you can't get on the same page there. That's cool. Good. Okay. So how did you know that therapy was complete? You said about 6 months total.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. How did it go toward the end, and how did it end up ending?
Right. So there were a few different components, one of which was what we just talked about. I was kind of, reaching a point where I, felt like, Jane had taught me so much, but we kind of kept coming up against that difference when we were focused more on my relationship when we were in counseling. But also, two different things. One, I knew from session 2 that Jane was planning to go private practice sometime in the next semester after we started. And so we had, we kind of knew, okay, this is the timeline we have to work with. And she was very clear that if I wanted to keep working with her after she went to private practice, we could work together. And we did for a few sessions. But I think, the time that we were really working together, that was, every week we've got this standing appointment that we're doing together. We knew we didn't have that long to do that. And her goal, like I said, like mine, was kind of to develop not necessarily a relationship where we would work together for, decade plus into perpetuity, but to help me, get to a point that I would totally feel if I needed to, I could go back to therapy and triage something that came up, but that in the day-to-day, I was kind of, empowered to take care of myself and to have the resources if, I am really dealing with anxiety, to understand where that comes from and how to, treat that on my own. So that was, I think, really important. And our final sessions before she left for private practice were really focused on reflecting on what all we had covered and, determining if I still had areas where I felt like I needed someone to work with regularly, at which point, she could have recommended that I be allowed to, start up with a new counselor at the center. But it felt, it felt right. I felt like, there wasn't anything really lingering of the initial reasons that it, sent me to therapy that I was still, at least felt unable to handle. I wouldn't say they weren't an issue anymore, but I felt like I had an understanding of where they were coming from.
I see. Cool. So that built-in kind of container of we have 6 months until the situation changes. So there's the goal, but then also just the feeling of it. It felt like the right time. It felt appropriate. The relationship had kind of maybe maxed itself out between you and Jane, but your relationship with yourself had so changed and improved that you could really take care of yourself in a way that you had needed her to kind of take the lead on at the beginning.
Right. I think we were at a point that I was just really happy for her that she was getting to move on to the next part in her career. Much as I knew I would miss her, I wasn't at a point where I was oh no, you can't leave me. I still really need this.
Yeah. And that's a pretty visceral kind of gut experience, and your ability to even identify that shows that you were in a healthy spot. So that's cool. Okay. And then last question, my favorite question. What would you tell your pre-therapy self?
I think I mentioned a little just that I definitely come from a community where going to counseling is stigmatized, where it's something that, only people who have something really wrong with them or who are, on the verge of self-harm are supposed to do or something. And I think that held me back for a long time. If I could talk to myself before, I would say, don't wait until like your 4th year of grad school to go take advantage of this resource. You know, what you're going through is stressful, and it can get a lot easier if you allow yourself to check out the kind of resources that you have. So I've tried to, you know, with all of my friends since then, be like, you know, you have to go check this out because I should have gone way sooner than I did. So I think that would be the main thing that I would say is just, you know, why keep waiting?
Cool. Yeah, that seems to be a theme. Like a lot of people kind of understand why they didn't start sooner and just would love to tell themselves to start sooner anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you so much, Kenna. Thank you for participating and being here and being brave. I know it's not an easy thing to do, so thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it actually.
Good. Thank you.